Nooks gets a lot of inbound applicants coming in. How do you vet through that? Because obviously you have a limited amount of time.
So the honest answer is I don't go through the ATS. I don't have time. But ultimately, we're hiring people who can break through the noise. And if someone can't break through the noise for themselves, I don't have a high level of confidence they'll be able to do it for a product or a tool.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Bravado Pod. Today, I've got my good friend, fellow East Bay resident, Fremont for life, Jonathan Blackburn, the legendary VP of Sales at Nooks. Jonathan, Easy Bay Living, what's up, sir? How are you?
Doing good, man. How are you?
Oh, I'm so happy, so excited to do this. Thank you for agreeing to come on the show and share some of your expertise, because there's a lot of people in the world that want to know how you've been cooking over at Nooks over the last year plus, and excited to get into it.
Appreciate it, man. Very kind introduction. Maybe too kind.
Well, I guess as background, you and I met, as most salespeople do, on the golf course, and had a great Half Moon Bay experience a few years ago. At the time, you were at Lattice, selling, I guess, mostly into HR and ops teams. How has the transition been for you to transition from selling into that department to selling into sales leaders and revenue leaders?
It was easier because it was actually a bit of a difficult transition for me moving into Lattice, selling into HR leaders. For so long, I had sold or led teams selling into go-to-market. So selling into HR leaders was a bit of a departure. I think learned a lot, had a lot of fun, but coming out of that, it's actually been really fun to be able to sell to salespeople and sales leaders.
So why don't you start by just giving us some context? So when did you join Nooks, and when you joined, about how big was the team, about what ARR, about how many customers, like what stage were you guys at?
When I joined the team, let's see, we had 3 SDRs, we had 3 AEs. I would say all the AEs were kind of just doing all the deals. There was no segmentation. There was nothing really in place there. We had I'd say low hundreds of customers. And we were single digit ARR. So we were, in many ways, I think just what you mentioned earlier, we had strong signs of product market fit. We had some really happy customers, but it was still very early days. And there was no, I'd say, clear replicable motion or process that we were operating off of, which is exciting, but also a lot of room for opportunity.
So 3 SDRs, 3 AEs, low hundreds of customers and low single digit ARR. And when was that again? What was the about month, year?
A little over a year ago. I think it was the first week of January that I joined of last year.
Okay, so Jan 2024. Okay, so now we're fast forwarding 14 months, and roughly where are you today with all of those counts?
Roughly, we're around 20 SDRs. We're around 20 AEs. We are double-digit millions. We had a very good year last year. And we are closer to 1,000 customers than we are to 500 customers.
Wow. So you've basically, roughly 6x'd the size of the team, 7x'd the size of the team, more than tripled the number of customers, and, more than 3, 4, 5x the revenue, even more than that on the revenue side. That's a hell of a year. Congratulations.
Thank you, man. It was a very fun year. It was a very busy year too.
Let's start. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is going from 6 people on the team to 40 people on the team is crazy. How did you do that?
A lot of interviews, a lot of conversations. We actually don't have a go-to-market recruiter. And so one of the first hires I made was actually our head of sales development. Her name is Melanie. She's absolutely amazing. She has done a lot with the SDR org to really kind of lead and grow that. For the majority of the year, I've really been spearheading all of the go-to-market, sales, revenue, hiring we've been doing on the AE side, RevOps side, the ancillary pieces of the org. It's been a lot of interviews, Ben. It's been a lot of interviews, a lot of, white knuckling, if you will. But we're at the point now where we're starting to we're building out the infrastructure around us to make it easier to scale this year.
Maybe talk me through your first 30, 60, 90 days as a VP of sales. You walk in, how do you think about your priorities? How do you think about your onboarding, your own ramp in order to get in seat?
Yeah, I think one thing that I actually did with our founders is we created a 60-day plan. I was the first executive they had ever hired. They'd hired 3 salespeople before me, the first leader executive they'd ever hired. And so I think it took a little bit of time for us to get to know each other, for us to work well together, for us to be able to find our groove. On the 30-day mark, I'd say like early on, how I really approached it is, we didn't get to where we were without being good at something, without being good at quite a few things actually. And so early on, I really wanted to figure out like what were we good at? Why did people love us? Why did they love the product? What made them excited? And what about our sales process, our sales motion was working? And how do we do more of that? Um, I think in that process, you're always going to be able to find, especially if you're a little bit more senior and coming into an early stage company, things that maybe don't really make sense, things that could be done better. But I actually think focusing on what the company does well early on is more valuable than finding all of the gaps. There's going to be a ton of gaps, especially at an early stage company. So that was really my focus in the first kind of 30 days.
And what did you find? What does the company do well?
What we did really well, and I think we still do really well, is we put our prospects and our customers first in our sales motion. We run trials as a part of our sales motion. And coming from someone who's been in kind of like SaaS tech for almost 16 years now, mostly selling enterprise tech, the word trial and sales motion just didn't really jive well with me, if I'm being honest with you. It makes me really nervous, really scared, for many, many, many reasons. I spent a good deal of time learning our product, being on calls with the team, learning our trial motion. And what I found in our trial motion is we do about 50% of the implementation during trial, which sets people up for success during the trial, but also makes it significantly easier for our customer success team to onboard our customers during the trial, or sorry, after the trial, excuse me. Which is really helpful. We also, man, our trial process is like is the most in-depth trial process I've ever experienced, and we've only gotten more in depth. And what I mean by that is our sales team, our AE team, they'll set up our workspaces. They'll pull numbers for customers. They have to act as a bit of like an SE in the beginning part of the trial. They'll do implementations, and then they have to actually kind of transition to being like almost like SDR managers. Because to use Nooks, especially for our dialer, you need to call, and you need to get the prospective team excited about calling. Not only do you need to get them to call, they need to be effective and efficient, because the one thing Nooks does really well is connects you with more people. If you're connecting with more people and you're not doing anything with those connects, it's not a great experience. So we need to be able to coach them. We need to be able to answer support or questions. We almost act as support during trials as well. And what I kept hearing time and time again on trials from prospects and people that signed up with us is the trial experience was their favorite part about Nooks, and the team support that they got throughout that experience was amazing. Our founders set the tone really early when I came of like, nothing is above anyone. And the amount of trials that they would jump into to support was pretty insane actually. And so like, I could go deeper on that, but essentially our trial motion was one of the things that jumped out to me as being a differentiator for us as a company.
In the age of AI products, this has been, hotly debated, because you're used to SaaS upfront enterprise 12-month, 24-month contracts, but AI products are generally like usage-based pricing, or come in and pay per outcome. You see a lot of that sort of thing coming into vogue. And so companies are, even if they don't call them trials, they're effectively in trials, because if the person doesn't use the product for a long time, then you're going to have some fallout. So how do you think about the, what advice would you give to a company, and how do you see this kind of playing out at other organizations outside of Nooks, in terms of adopting a mentality of try before you buy?
One of the reasons I had probably so much scar tissue coming up in SaaS in my earlier days of SaaS, is you really couldn't try something before you buy it, especially with enterprise-wide implementations for a lot of tools. And having the product for lack of a better phrase, be triable. Having like being able to actually try the product and experience it has made the sales process significantly easier. Everything leading up to the sales process is a little bit tougher. We do a lot of security, a lot of legal, a lot of those things before we actually begin the process. But the amount of times that we did all of that, set the team up for success, turn the trial on, and people said, I don't want you to turn this thing off. Like, how quickly can we get this wrapped up? Has actually made it a little bit, I'd say, extended the process slightly to get to a trial, but our close rates on trials are insane. I think as of last quarter, we had a 72% win rate on every deal that went to a trial. Um, and the majority of them don't want us to turn it off. And so because we do most of the work up front, we don't have to. We can actually move through commercials pretty quickly from that point on, which from a negotiating standpoint makes our lives a little bit easier too.
For sure. Are the trials paid?
No, they're free.
They're free trials. And so you're committing a lot of resources if you're doing super in-depth implementations, SDR coaching, support, et cetera, without the guarantee of revenue on the other side. You said this was a process that was established prior to you getting there?
Yes. Yeah.
Interesting. I wonder how many companies would have chosen to do something like that. It feels like it's something that a lot of companies are allergic to trying to do up front,
This was the big part of our sales process coming in that I called it out with our founders too coming in of like, I don't know if that makes sense, but I'm going to keep an open mind. When I saw the data, when I experienced it for myself, I realized it was the right thing for us to do, but also to be transparent with you. If our win rates weren't 60, 70%, we would probably, it might have been a different conversation, I would say, or we might have had to adjust what we were doing there. But it's definitely made a big impact. And I will say too, going back to like your original question of 30, 60, 90, I kind of talked through some of the 30. The 60-day piece is really, I think, where like there was no 90-day piece, if I'm being really honest with you. It was 30, 60 days. It was like evaluate and fix and do. And that 60-day, I think that second part of the 30 days there, the 60 days was really me focused on like up-leveling the team and the skill set of the team. One of my early KPIs coming in was help us win more 40K deals. I think we had one or two deals maybe or customers maybe above 70K when I joined, but there was just this kind of glass ceiling we had around 40K deals. Our win rate just wasn't what it needed to be. If you fast forward to the end of the year, we were winning 6-figure deals at a much higher clip than we ever won 40. And for quite a while, actually, we've broken the record for largest deal closed in history. It feels like every month almost.
Wow.
Part of that is up-leveling the skill set of the team, but a part of that is actually just making sure the company is able to actually have the conversations that it needs to and support those types of customers. And I felt like that's where early on we needed the biggest uplift was making sure that we were able to support those large customers. But that kind of 60-day period of like, okay, I've gone through this. I know what we do well. I want to double down on that. Where do I actually figure out how do I implement or like how do I spend time figuring out like the bigger lifts for us to do or fix on the go-to-market side. And that was a big part of it is like, how can we put ourselves in position as a company to be more successful with those upmarket deals by being able to support them and also help them understand that like we help us earn their business is maybe a better way to put it.
What does it take to support a 50, 75, 100K customer that you can get away with like 20, 30K deals, but you can't get away with larger? What do you mean by the company needed to learn to be able to have those conversations?
A lot of things we were doing, we weren't building enough trust in our sales motions. We had, for example, like there was security, there was legal, there was implementations. It was like when we brought in our CS team and like what that looked like, what those conversations were like. And I think a big part of it is early on getting ahead of some of these things, actually having an MSA we felt comfortable with, having a legal process, having a security process, and not handling each of these items as like a one-off, like we got an InfoSec questionnaire or we got red lines on our MSA. Like, how do we handle that? What do we do? one of the bigger things I did was actually just pulled more people into the sales process. I pulled in our founders a lot. We pulled in engineering support, security support. We pulled in a lot of people earlier in the process. And I think that gave customers more trust in us as a company that we would be able to support them. Um, what actually really helped too was leaning into customer references and investor advisor notes. Maybe something we can go into more if you want to a little bit later, but I've never been in a company where we leverage our investors and advisors as much as we do here, and our customers as much too. And building a replicable motion and process around how we pull them in, when we pull them in, and what we ask of them was incredibly important in us building more trust with our customers to be able to close those larger deals.
I think there's a lot of companies that struggle to maximize the ROI of the investors on their cap table or the customers who are referenceable. How do you guys handle that, and how do you get the most juice out of it?
We are big on process, and so there's a couple of facets of that. We push back really hard. So in our MSA, like in our terms, we have like logo rights and case study rights and a couple other things. 99% of the time, those get redlined out by legal pretty early on. We actually push pretty hard. That actually has become one of our kind of sacred cows in our terms. It was such an important part of how we grew, and just word of mouth, people talking about Nooks and being willing to share their experiences. That we actually lean pretty heavily into that. We don't just fold. I guess this is like the easiest way to phrase it when people push back on that. We do hold a pretty clear line there, especially if there's any kind of discounting or anything tied to the deal. We have a list internally of customers, how we actually leverage them. We do give advisory shares to a decent amount of customers that are willing to be references for us as well. So they have some skin in the game, and they're excited about referencing us and talking to potential customers, not just because they love Nooks, which a lot of them are willing to do it simply because of that, but also because they're invested in us and our success as a company and a business. And our investors, man, our investors and our advisors are so excited to talk about us. We actually have a couple of lists that I manage and keep internally where we've gotten our investors to basically send out weekly, in some cases, if not monthly notes to customers, where our sales team will actually go in. They'll put the customers, we have emails that we write that they send for us to show confidence in Nooks. And we have all different spreadsheets, and this is all tracked, not just in Google Sheets, but also in HubSpot and other places too, where we lean really heavily into like building processes and like building more replicable motions around how we leverage them. What I found is that investors and advisors are generally excited and willing to help. Where it tends to kind of fall off the rails is if you don't leverage them enough, or if it's just kind of messy. Like, we're all busy people, they're busy people, they're happy to help. But if we make it too hard on them and we aren't consistent with our asks, they typically kind of lose focus, or this becomes less of a priority. But by keeping it top of mind, by making it really easy for them, and by being very consistent with the asks, we have a number of investors that will send out notes for us every week.
And are these notes for intros, or are these people mid-flight in process, or like where do you find the greatest ROI with using advisors?
All of the above, I'd say, is my honest answer. We leverage them at every point in the sales cycle and the sales process. We leverage them to help us break into companies if there's connections. A non-insignificant amount of our pipeline, especially our like SaaS tech pipeline, is built around that. We leverage them early in the process, especially if we find out that it's a competitive deal. Typically, we'll pull in a customer reference or two very early in the process if it's a competitive deal as well. And then we'll leverage them throughout the process. And in the rare cases where like we're in a trial or we're coming out of a trial and like we need to make a business case, or it's not an immediate yes, we'll pull in advisors, we'll pull in investors to send notes, to reach out to people during the sales motion, the latter parts of it. The notes that we send, how we ask them to share, like what sentiments we ask them to share, like that's all unique to the part of the sales process and the motion. But our goal is to stay top of mind with prospects throughout the process, and we leverage them at 4 unique parts of our sales motion.
Super interesting. Do you use a tool? You said you use Google Sheets and your CRM to track it. You don't use like a specific tool to do this.
I think I am the tool.
Did you bring this to Nooks or was this there before you got there?
This was there before I got there. We actually do use, we have two different ways we do it. Most of it is through spreadsheets and through that. We do use High Five though, as a way to like, kind of partner with some of our advisors. But we have a separate process, like I mentioned, for our investors and another core group of people. But I kind of run all those motions simultaneously.
Got it. How do you find time to do that and to hire, 40 people in a year? Maybe let's talk about the profile of rep that you bring on, maybe for the SDR role and for the AE role. What are you looking for? What makes someone excellent, an excellent seller at Nooks?
We've gone through an evolution of this in my time here. Early on, when I first joined, I hired a couple of people for my network, and people that I knew were really good sellers, and I was excited to kind of bring them on with me. They worked really well. They were really fantastic sellers. And then we went through kind of like a hiring class in the summer. And transparently, like some of the people worked out and some of them didn't. And that was really the first time as a company where we had a cohort of people who hadn't worked out. And we kind of had some trial and error with that. We knew what types of sellers worked well for Nooks. Typically, we had hired people who had sold into the sales tech landscape. We had hired people who had been either in a competitive, come from a competitor or a similar space. And the reason for that was they could bring some kind of Rolodex or some kind of deals with them. It helped them ramp a little bit faster. Selling to salespeople can be a little bit tough. I'm a sales leader. You've been a sales leader. You're a founder. Like, we're busy. A lot of times I just want people to get right to what they need of me or like what the value prop is. And we tend to be a little bit direct, and we do this for a living. So I think we're like, whether people want to admit it or not, there's always some bias coming into it of what I coach my team to sell like this, or do I think they're doing this right? They can be very honest, but also very direct. It's kind of a dual-edged sword there. And we've brought in people who sold to HR tech, who sold to more technical buyers. And they just haven't worked out quite as well as a cohort, if I'm being honest with you. I think having people who have experience selling into sales tech, or people who are excited or willing to take that challenge on, has been important. And we try to build that out in our sales motion.
I mean, it's something that obviously we spend a lot of time recruiting across many industries at Bravado. And one of the things that I think many founders and sales leaders underestimate is the criticality of having sold into the same buyer persona. Now, in some cases, the same buyer persona can buy similarly, even if it's not exactly the same persona. But, I think if you are used to selling to CISOs or CTOs, and now you're going to sell to sales leaders, you're going to find that to be really difficult, and the inverse of that as well. But, if you sold MarTech and you sell sales tech, like you probably can get away with that. You can figure out how that works. But yeah, I think there's like different phenotypes and different motions, different processes, and you need to be, I think the competitive sell is a really important one too. Obviously Nooks has a couple really big, main competitors and a bunch of other ankle biters that are coming, and this is a hot space to be in. And so you've got to be, able to speak with some domain expertise and some authority, build trust in the customer that you know what you're talking about as a seller.
Totally. And there are some traits that like we interview for and that we hire for in the process that are important to us as well. And I'm happy to go
Tell me
into
more.
that too if you want.
Yeah, tell me more.
There's a couple of things that are important to me, and I think there's a couple of things that are important to us as a company. What's really important to me on the sales team is that we build a strong culture, specifically a culture of people who want to be here, who are excited to learn, who want to work together. It's really important to me that we build a strong team. I want to work with people, and I want people to come here that are excited to build something and do something not just for themselves, but for each other. I want people to show up and be excited about the people working next to them. I have a wife and a daughter. I say this quite frequently in interviews. I love them to death. I would probably rather be with them than doing anything else. And if I'm not going to be with them, then I really want to fucking enjoy what I'm doing and who I'm doing it with. It's really important to me. And so working with people who have a similar mindset of like, yeah, I'm going to show up to work every day and do my best, but I also want to make sure that like I want to be a part of a team. I want to help people. This isn't me versus everyone else. This is us trying to accomplish something together. And we suss that out through the interview process in various ways. But what's also important to me is people are coachable. None of us are perfect. I am far from perfect. You ask my wife, she'll probably say the same thing. And I think that's true of every person in the org. And I typically lean into that during interview processes because I really want people to think, I want them to know that none of us are perfect. We're all trying to grow. We're all trying to improve. And I want to create that space so that when we do our sales interviews and our processes and our mocks, I've created that space for them to be open. We do mock disco demos in the sales as part of the interview process. And there's various things we test for their acumen and how they ask questions, what their sales process is like. At the end, we ask people for feedback. And honestly, man, if there's one thing that I get from these interviews, the look on someone's face when I say, is it okay if I give you some feedback? Is probably all that I need to know from that entire conversation, 9 times out of 10.
Yeah.
Because no matter what someone says, you can't hide that look on your face. And typically what I'll do when I say that is they'll always say yes because it's an interview typically. And like, they're not gonna like, but I can tell based on how they respond and what their face tells me and everything like that, and just kind of their general body language. I'll typically give them some feedback and I'll be pretty direct and pretty honest. And I'll say, hey, you did this really well, but there are these, this thing and this thing you did incredibly well. That was, very, very impressive. And then I'll be very direct about something they could have improved on. And again, I want to see how they respond because a lot of times when we're selling to these salespeople and sales leaders, they get this direct feedback. And you would be surprised how many people in the interview process say they want feedback, don't actually want feedback. And then when they get some kind of like feedback that's constructive, generally tend to disagree with it or have a lot of reasons as to why it's invalid feedback. And that's completely fine. Like everyone has their own perspective and their own opinion. But that is so important to me, not just from the feedback perspective, but because you will be selling to people who will constantly be telling you in a very direct and blunt way what they think you're doing well and what they think you're not. And that's a part of the process that we really leaned into as we've continued hiring.
We want people who have expertise in selling to your domain. You want people who are coachable. You want people who are willing to grow and have kind of it's almost like an entrepreneurial mindset where you're always looking to get a little bit better. And you know that like today's the worst that this product's ever going to be. Today's the worst I'm going to show up to work, and every day I'll try to get better. Are there other kind of secrets that you've figured out as you've been scaling so quickly? Because I'll tell you, there's a lot of companies that I know that are facing a similar sort of growth plan in front of them where they're trying to go from 5 to 20 or, whatever, 2 to 15 in a year. And it can be daunting, like to successfully having gone from 3 to 20. There's very few companies that can do that in a year, especially without having a large recruiting team at your behest to be able to handle that. Nooks gets a lot of inbound applicants coming in, gets a lot of attention in LinkedIn, et cetera. How do you vet through that? What is your process to try to even figure out and filter how you can spend your time? Because obviously you have a limited amount of time. You've got those customer notes to get out too. So
the honest answer is, I think for across our sales roles, we maybe had 12,000 applicants over the last 4 months. I don't have anyone recruiting. I don't have the time or the space to actually go through the applicants, the ATS, and track that consistently. There's just not enough. That is probably a full-time job for 2 people. What I actually tend to rely on are people who are creative in the interview process. Because to me, that's actually what we're really hiring for, is how do you break through the noise? And so I'll just share anecdotally of those 12,000, let's just say 12,000-ish people that have applied over X period of months. I maybe have gotten 1,000 LinkedIn notes over the past 3 months, which feels like a lot sometimes, especially trying to manage my LinkedIn inbox.
But it's only 8%.
Yeah. And of those, I've maybe gotten 100 emails. And of those, I've maybe gotten 35 people who called me.
Wow.
So the honest answer is, again, I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but it's the truth. I don't go through the ATS. I don't have
Mhm.
time. We are hiring recruiters, so we will. But ultimately, we're hiring people who can break through the noise. And if someone can't break through the noise for themselves, for their own career, for the job that they want, I don't have a high level of confidence they'll be able to do it for a product or a tool.
That's so well said. That's gonna turn into a great gem that we're gonna post on social media. That was really, really well stated. If you can't even sell yourself, can't break through the noise, it's gonna be hard to sell a product.
Yeah.
I think that's really well said. Um, before we move on, because I want to talk a lot about enabling and onboarding those people, um, are there any red flags that you've learned along the way of whether it's mishires or people who seemed really promising in the interview process that kind of flopped at the end? Are there any kind of red flags of qualities as you're assessing talent that you found to try to avoid that can help you avoid a mishire?
The one thing that we really look for in the process, so I mentioned coachability, I mentioned some of the softer things. There's more stuff that I can go into there, but like at the risk of getting too detailed in some of that, how people treat the interview process, I found to be very similar to what their sales motion looks like. As part of our mock disco demo, we kind of actually, we don't imply, we say in the prompt, feel free to set yourself up for success. Tell us who you want us to be. Tell us what you want us to talk about. I ask people to sell their product. I want to see them as comfortable as humanly possible. And I'll typically ask them in the feedback section. I'll ask them how we did because I'll kind of want to get feedback there too. I find it really helpful when people actually do give us feedback and say, you did this really well. You could have done this better. This is different than my current customer, because it shows me that there's some critical thinking there. When they send prompts before as if this is a sales call or sales motion, and they say, hey, excited to meet with you later today. These are the things I want you to talk about. These are the things that I want you to, these are the problems I want you to have, the pains I want you to have. And then they send detailed follow-ups. When people treat the interview process like a good sales process, I found that to be a really good litmus test for just how they actually sell in general, which is really important. I also look for people who have been promoted internally. I don't really I don't really care that much, truthfully, like how like job tenure, how long someone's been in a job. Like, I've been doing this for a long time. I think a lot of us have been doing this for a long time, know that sometimes you just make mistakes. Sometimes you think you picked the right company, it wasn't the right company, or the company doesn't do right by you. And it's hard to it 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 feels wrong for me to put too much of an emphasis on something that some people don't have in their control. But what I do look for is how often people get promoted internally. As you probably know, as I know, it's way harder to get promoted internally than it is to get promoted externally. Um, and I found that people who are really high slope, who get promoted internally often, who run a really tight interview process, um, tend to do really well. I think what you said earlier, people who tend to have more of a founding kind of like entrepreneurial mindset tend to do really well. The last thing I'll say to this is, at some point in the interview process, I will move away from selling for Nooks and move into selling against Nooks. And I think I'm in a very privileged position to be able to do this because, to your point, in our little ecosphere, in our bubble, Nooks gets a lot of recognition online. I think we're number 3 or 4 or 5 on RepView or something obscenely high. I think we're one of the top companies on Glassdoor as well for our size. I love both of those things because it means that we've been able to build a winning culture, and all the time and effort and work that I put into our culture really permeates and kind of shines, and people are excited about that. But I will lean into selling against Nooks to tell people this will probably be the most rewarding, fun, fulfilling, and hardest job you've ever had. And then I'll usually kind of pause, let that sit, and then I'll lean into, are you sure you're excited about that? Are you sure you're at a point in your life or a season in your life where you're able to commit to something like this? And I'll really kind of lean into the like, this is fun, but like, don't get it twisted. Like Nooks isn't flying off the shelves per se. Like, we have to sell it. Like, it's a job and it's a fun job and it's rewarding, but it's really hard. And I guarantee anyone that comes to Nooks will have more fun and work harder than they've ever done in their life in both of those aspects. And I really think that like it's my duty to lean into that early on with people and call that out. And I have had people self-select and say, that sounds amazing, but that's not right for me right now. And I
Yeah.
love that because I want people to make that decision now as opposed to 3 months down the line.
That's so well said and such a great nugget. I think many companies, when they fall in love with a candidate, are get into sell mode too quickly without being honest or earnest with themselves and with the candidate about whether this is the right fit. I love what you said about, is this a season in your life where you can do that? That's a really thoughtful way of putting it, because we do all have those moments when it's not right for us to be doing that, and times when we can.
Totally. I think those of us with children or small children can probably attest to that too.
Oh my God. Yeah, having two kids under the age of 3 while trying to run Bravado was me not at my peak, I would definitely say, but
Yeah,
we're coming out the other side.
nice.
All right, let's shift to, all right, you've got all these people. Let's start talking about how you actually set them up for success. Tell me about what you've done around sales ops, around enablement, around tech, around management levels, around KPIs and ramps, and like how do you think about getting your class of people in such so that they're set up for success and productive as soon as possible?
This is an ongoing thing of us constantly trying to improve. I am really bullish that we hire incredibly talented salespeople. We have a really rigorous interview process. We have a high level of applicants in which we pass a few through. I go really deep on not just the sales, not just the interview process, but also we go deep on referrals, back channels, everything. Which is all to say that I know that when someone comes to Nooks, they're a talented seller who has done very well at their job. And from there, it's kind of on me and us. If we're hiring incredibly talented people, it's on us to make sure they're successful. And if they're not, then that's our fault essentially, in my opinion, not theirs. And so this is something that I take incredibly serious. When we had our first kind of cohort of hiring, and we've evolved this ever since, but we had our first big cohort of hiring. I sat down and I built out a really detailed spreadsheet of I'm a new rep coming into Nooks. What do I need to be doing every day for the first 30 days? And so I built a really detailed sheet of um, what they needed to do on a daily, a weekly, and kind of a monthly basis for their first couple days, first week, first month, first quarter. I'll go into the details of what that looks like, but the first thing I'll say is I think ramp is how you structure ramp is really important in this process. Some companies do draws, some companies don't. Some companies guarantee ramp, some companies don't. Um, some companies have ridiculous expectations for ramp, and some have almost laughable expectations when it comes to the ease of something. What I really try to focus on in building our ramp process is how do I align what the business needs are to what the reps desires are. So what we actually do at Nooks is we don't do a guaranteed draw or a guaranteed comp for your first couple months. We pay an incredibly high percentage of commission on every deal closed within your first couple months. It's pretty obscenely high, especially it's obscenely high for SaaS, for tech, but it's intentional. And I am so excited to pay it when people close deals, because what I want them to do is get ramped as quickly as possible and become as effective and efficient as quickly as possible and close deals as fast as possible. And I will pay a very high amount of commission to achieve those things. And what we found is it's been incredibly helpful in helping us ramp reps and getting them motivated to go through the process as fast as possible.
What is obscenely high?
25%. We pay 25% commission on every deal sold in your first 4
Wow.
months.
Wow. That's that can be a big chunk of change if you're knocking out a couple 50, 100K deals.
It can be. And I'll tell you what, man, I'm very glad to pay it. Especially if that means that they're crushing ramp quota in their first couple months. If you're knocking out 50, 100K deals in your first 4 months, that's a win. That's a huge win.
But it's so motivating and so exciting to be able to do that. I at Glassdoor, we had a thing which we called our Cadillac bonus, and it was anybody who hit their annual quota in their first year in 9 months. So if in 9 months you hit your annual quota,
Oh, wow.
you got an extra $10,000 in cash from the VP of sales. And I remember the amount of hard work that went into people just trying to get that bonus in. And,
Yeah.
and 10 grand was nothing to the business relative to how hard people worked for it. But just to have the VP of sales hand you a band with $10,000 in cash. I mean, this maybe is like illegal from like a tax perspective or whatever, these days. But
Yeah.
back in the good old days, like literally they would just come over and just drop a band of cash on your desk if you hit it. And it was just the coolest thing to be able to do.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, it might be gift cards or something nowadays. It is important. And we have SMB, mid-market, commercial, enterprise. So like the ramp is a little bit different for each segment in each part of the business, but we still do 25% commission regardless of the segment. The time to ramp is a little bit different. Kind of working back into like what that looks like and what that looks like early on. We have a series of certifications that we have the team go through. So we do a DISCO certification, a demo certification, a trial certification, and then we actually circle back after we've done all of those to do like deeper levels of certifications on them, specifically as it relates to like competitive intel and stuff like that. Like your first couple of weeks, your first month, you're not going to pick up all of that. Like you need to be able to do the basics really well. And then once you've learned that, like we do a second pass of like going a little bit deeper on more of the nuance of all of this.
And who built all of that?
I did. The initial iteration of everything I built.
Did you just work like 27 hours a day in order to do this? I mean, I still haven't heard whether you sold any deals yourself while you were doing this. I guess that's the other thing I was thinking is as you're building all of this, like, were you actually selling at the same time?
When I first joined, I certified myself on some of these, and then I probably did like 10 to 15 deal cycles. What I will say is like when things got close to being like ready to buy, I would just pass it to a rep. Like I would want to make sure someone else got credit. But early on, my first couple of weeks, I did sell at Nooks. I thought it was important for me to, especially that early on, to learn the motion and to like really get to experience it and feel it. It is something that we have all of our new managers go through though. We do this, I'll kind of share this. This is a bit off topic, but I'll share it with you anyway. At our offsites or onsites, we do 2 a year. We do one in SF and we do one somewhere sunny during the summer. We have a cold call competition. And the cold call competition involves every single person in the company, engineers, marketing, product, no matter who you are, we're cold calling. And I remember we had our onsite my first month at the company, and it was up in SF, which is where the first one always is. And I was like, oh, this seems like kind of a cool idea. I don't know. And then we pull a bunch of lists, and then, dude, seeing engineers and seeing these like technical product people call and book meetings, by the way, was like so fucking mind blowing. I was like, this is amazing. But it also really set the context of like, as a company, one of our big kind of like general ethos is like, we all do the work and nothing is beneath any of us. And one of the things that I do when I do hire new leadership, if I'm promoting leadership, obviously this is a little bit less relevant, but if I'm hiring someone externally for a leadership role, I'll set the context of like, your first month, you're going to sell. And it's important that you sell, and it's important you're excited to do that too. So yes, I did sell. I built all of this, but thankfully we hired people who were much smarter and much better at these things than I am to kind of like build the second and third versions of this to make sure they're constantly improving.
I can't let that point go, which is I feel like so many VPs of sales show up to a role and just focus on like the deals and the reps and stuff. But it seems like you were building so much. I mean, you're building all the training, you're building this process around references, you're building the interview process, you're building, like you've got your, I recall you told me that you're even like doing like financial modeling and stuff, like, you're like basically doing all of it. And having that like ownership mentality across it, I think is really a unique trait across what I see many VPs of sales do when they show up to a role.
It's really easy at a certain point in your career, especially if someone will let you, to sit back and say, I've been doing this for a long time. I'm really good at this part of the process. I'm just going to focus on this. I think it's a mistake though. And I think when I see people who take on these kinds of roles, maybe not even as early stage, to be honest with you, man, like this is such an early stage role. Like I knew coming in, I was going to have to do this, but also like, I enjoy this. Like I'm good at it. I enjoy it. well, I think I'm good at it. People keep paying me to do it, so
That's right.
I
That's right.
think I'm good at it.
That's a good sign is when the market supply demand
Yeah.
equation seems to indicate that you're probably good at
And
it.
I think it's a big miss when people don't do that. There's some things I can share too if you want to get to them later around like we kind of touched on my first couple of months and like how as a new VP of sales to set yourself up for success there. But I will just say kind of going back to the original kind of like um spirit of the question around onboarding, we do all these certifications. We have scorecards built out for each of these, and we have sales acumen, traits, characteristics, things, and like we weight certain scores based off certain things that like give a percentage based off what's important to us and what we've seen people be successful with. And so there's like on some level it's pass or fail, yes, but we do give graded scores to say, hey, is this a 92%? Is this an 87%? Like how good is good on this? Um, and depending on where someone is, we will actually spend more time or maybe less time with them, depending on their needs. I recently brought in a sales enablement leader who I'm so excited and so lucky to have been able to brought in. He was on my team at Lattice. He was our team lead, mid-market team lead. I had the privilege of promoting him to manager. Um, and at one point, he was the head of mid-market for Lattice after I left, and he went on to become a VP for a short stint. And as he was thinking about what he wanted to next, he really wanted to get into enablement. And he's so good at everything he's ever done that I said, dude, whatever you want to do, like I would just be lucky to have you on the team. And I think he's been a tremendous addition to us being able to up-level a lot of our skills and processes. And what he'll actually do is we build a process where he will spend the first 3 days of a week with a new hire and teach them the nuance of like how we do discovery, how we get to pain, how we progress the conversation forward, how we demo, how we close each section, all the nuance, which like we have a pretty detailed process that I've kind of built out here that we want to make sure people that we feel bullish about and want to make sure people follow. And that takes some of the pressure off managers of off our management team of having to teach people how to sell and support their current team and teach them how to like the tool works and more of the nuance of that. And it's been really beneficial to us as we started to scale too.
Is this your first sales enablement hire, by the way, or did you have one before?
He is, yeah, he's our first.
So what about for sales ops? Do you have people that are doing that now? Did you have that early on, or are you just doing all of it?
I'm currently hiring somebody for that at the moment. I think it's a role we probably should have hired 4 months ago, but I'm currently hiring somebody for that right now.
Let's talk about managing up a little bit as a VP of sales. Walking in, working with some young founders, and you're the first kind of exec that they brought on, a board that's obviously excited to see how fast this thing can grow. Tell me about, early days and even today, like how you set yourself up for success as a VP of sales managing up.
I'm sure if you ask our founders, they will say that we had a lot of fun conversations early on. I am a big believer in pushing back where I feel it's necessary and pushing back pretty often. I think where I've gotten better at this, and I think where I've been told I'm really good at this is pushing back on the right things and not just pushing back on everything, because that can be kind of tiresome to just always be the person who feels like you're slowing everything down and pushes back on everything. But pretty early on when I came in, and we had talked about this before I joined, but there was a growth plan. Like we wanted to get from X million in revenue to X million in revenue from the beginning of the year by the end of the year. And my comp plan, my target was built off of that. But I realized after being here for a couple of weeks that we weren't in a position, I didn't feel we were in a position to hit the revenue number that I had signed up for after having been here, after seeing where we were at as a business, what was working, what wasn't, what we had in place and what we didn't. And so what I actually did is, I think you mentioned the modeling. I built a couple of models. I was given a model by our founders, and I didn't feel that it was accurately reflecting the state of the business, and I didn't feel that it accurately reflected the complexity of getting to where we needed to go. So I built 2 models, and I work with some people on the team. I should say I work with people on the team to help build these models. But we built 2 models, and the first was, if we're going to get to this size revenue work, if we're going to get to this number, this is what this org is going to look like. This is how many salespeople we need to have. This is what ramp is going to look like. this is what leadership capacity, this is what RevOps, enablement, like this is what the entire org is going to look like. And this is how much it's going to cost to get there. And this is the complexity that it's going to take to get there. And then I laid out a plan of what we needed to do every single month to be able to hit that. And the conversation was, you said you want to get here. This is what this is going to look like in reality. Are we sure we can do that? And are you committing to giving us and me the resources to doing that? And that created a really interesting conversation. And I will say, like, our founders are young. They are incredibly smart. They are first principle thinkers by necessity, because this is the first time they've ever, had a job or done anything.
It's the only principle they know.
100%. And man, do I fucking love that. A lot of companies say they're first principles, but they're not really first principles. But like we live and breathe it every day, because that is who we are. And that is who they are. And we had a couple of really honest conversations about that. And the second was, I built a pipeline model where we basically went through, if you want me to do this, okay, now we're aligned on what the complexity of the org is going to look like, how much it's going to cost, what budget is going to look like, what burn is going to look like. If you want me to do this, I need this from a pipeline perspective. And some of it is outbound. Obviously, that's on me and the SDR and the AE team. Some of it is inbound, and some of it comes from, AE outbound, SDR outbound, and inbound were kind of the three primary channels that we kind of walk through. And basically I said, I can do this part of it, but I need you to commit to this. And if you commit to this, I will. And we had a lot of really honest conversations around, can we commit to that? What does that look like? And the culmination of that was, they said, yes, we will commit to getting you this pipeline, and we will commit to getting you this budget, and we will commit to doing what we need to build this org. And they did it, and we did it. But it took a lot of conversations. It took a lot of back and forth, and it took a lot of, I think, I don't want to say negotiating, but like being transparent and pushing back pretty hard on things that I felt were unreasonable and that I didn't feel like were things that we should agree to. And I think I've gotten this advice often in my career from people who are mentors of mine and a little bit more senior than me, of like, if you get a number, agree to the number and just find a way to make it work. Or some version of just take the number, that's the least risky thing you can do, and do your best. And I've always had the mentality of like, no, that's fucking stupid. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to commit to something that I don't reasonably feel like we can do. Or if we are going to do it, I think there needs to be better alignment around what the reality of that looks like. And I give our founders so much credit, because they weren't on board with that. We had a lot of conversations. They quickly got on board. They got on my side, or I should say we joined forces, and we executed off of that. And I feel really confidently like that is what led us there. And I will say, one of the things that, like, just to be very transparent about this, that I led with was, during this early phase, this getting to double digit millions is a lot of defining product market fit. Yeah, we've got some people that have bought Nooks and they love it, but we really need to define like what our motion is across all these segments, and we really need to define product market fit. And it's a risky thing to sign up for a big number and just hire a bunch of people based off spreadsheet math that I think puts the company and us in a pretty irresponsible position. And what I agreed with them on was, we're going to let the pipeline define when we need to continue to hire. It was really important to me that pipeline come first, salespeople come second. And I wanted our team to beg me to hire more people. I wanted them to say, we are so busy, we cannot do this anymore. That can be a pretty fun conversation. I'm using the word fun pretty loosely, but that can be a pretty fun conversation to have with early founders who have just taken a lot of money from VCs and have really high expectations. And the compromise was, like, in our first year, as we're defining product market fit, we moved slower, and I'd rather put the team in a position to overperform than hire a bunch of people and have to lay them off and like be irresponsible with that. And that's how we executed. And I will say we averaged 126% quota attainment throughout last year. So we were slow to hire.
Dude, that's a really, really great nugget. And I guess, when you talk about pipeline, how do you think about what percentage of the pipeline should be created by those segments? You said there was SDR outbound, AE outbound, and then inbound. Those were the three segments.
Yes. I'll tell you how I approach it and how I think about this. And it's very similar to how I approach and think about going up market. I don't think I'll start with the up market one since they're very similar, but I don't think you can force your way up market. It is my strong belief after having done this a couple of times and having been hired, including at Lattice, to build up market orgs, that you can't force your way up market. You have to be pulled up market. And I think very similar when you think about pipeline structure. It was really important for me to look at the historical data. I mean, there wasn't a ton of historical data, but like look at the historical data to say, how has pipeline been coming in and how are we actually executing on that pipeline? Because if we got to where we are by 60% inbound and we're saying, great, we're going to do 90% outbound. Well, guess what? Our entire go-to-market motion is going to be different. Our win rates are going to be different. Our sales cycle links are going to be different. And so I think I believe it's a combination of looking at historical data, looking at the reality of what pipeline looks like and how revenue is coming in currently, and incrementally building off of that, and then making strategic bets on. We've had 0% AE outbound because our AEs have been so incredibly busy. But if we can get capacity right, we can reasonably expect 15%. I'm just using random numbers, 15% to come to here, and this is how we're going to do it. So it's a combination of looking at historical data and being real and honest about the situation, and then making some strategic bets on where you think that the team and the company can improve.
I mean, obviously you have such a unique perspective on this because of the product set that you're building, but I've been having a bunch of conversations with sales leaders around SDR and kind of the resurgence of the SDR role. Has that been your experience as well, that SDRs are starting to perform better than they were over the last couple of years, and built in part because of tools, but in part maybe because so many companies stopped cold calling that the airwaves got a little emptier or something? I don't really know.
This isn't a controversial opinion by any means, but I think that I think outbound and SDRs have gotten better because they've had to. When I joined Nooks, before I joined Nooks, I had a couple of months off, and I must have talked to 200 founders, investors, VCs. Incredibly lucky and privileged to have had that opportunity. I still can't believe that many people actually wanted to talk to me. But to be able to have those conversations and looking back at the companies that I was at that were incredibly successful, thinking about like Lattice and SurveyMonkey and these companies, they had a really good product at the right time in the market. And I think so many people dismiss timing in the market. I've worked at companies that had significantly more developed products and maybe even smarter people and just weren't as successful. But when you get a really good product and a really good team at the right time in the market, magic can happen. And I don't think I've ever admitted this like publicly, but like when I was looking for my next role, what I was really trying to figure out is like, what does culture look like? Am I excited about solving this problem and working with these people? But also, how can I time the market? And granted, if I could time the market, I'd be a much richer person. But like, how can I actually time the market and figure out what's the right product or the right space for me to be in right now? And of this 200, let's just say, I'm using round numbers, 200 founders, investors, people I talked to, maybe 180, 190 of them asked me some version of, how do you build outbound? How can you do that? And the reason they would ask me that is because before Lattice, I was at a company called Reciprocity, where we were 90% outbound driven, bootstrapped, hadn't taken any money. And we went from, $2 to $24 million in 2 years, being completely outbound driven and bootstrapped. And my honest answer was, that was, 6, 7, 8 years ago. To be honest with you, like, I'm not sure we can even run those same plays or that even works anymore. And then I talked to the guys at Nooks and had a couple conversations with them. They showed me their roadmap, and I remember thinking, okay, like, I've had 180 people, give or take, ask me how to build outbound pipeline, and these guys showed me a product and a roadmap for the next couple of years that actually does this and automates it. And it's a long way of saying, to answer your question, kind of a little bit of why I joined Nooks, but also a long way of saying, I think we've gotten better at outbound because we've had to. Inbound has dried up, and people have said, shit, I need to figure out a way to actually do this and make it more effective. And what we found at Nooks through our data, but I can also just share anecdotally in my career, having done this for a long time, people who pick up the phone, people who have real conversations, meaningful conversations with prospective clients tend to do better. On average, people that cold call tend to do, I think it's like 1.8 to 2x better than their colleagues and counterparts that don't.
There's probably some like selection bias in that generally, I would imagine, because the people
Probably,
who
yeah.
are willing to pick up the phone and cold call tend to have more confidence and tend to, whatever. And so there's probably some like,
Yeah,
there's some
true.
of that, but overall, it has also been my experience in my career. I started my career at a company called Meltwater that had 1,000 employees and 950 were in sales. I mean, it was the most burner sales shop of all time. And the CEO had this philosophy of setting up these like 15, 20 person sales offices all over the world. So Meltwater had, I think it was like 55 offices, each one with like 15 to 20, 22 to 29-year-old like folks that were doing 100 dials a day. I didn't even know there was a concept called inbound until my second job. I'd never heard of inbound. I was not aware that such a thing even existed. And I recall that like you just had to generate your own pipeline because there was no other way to get any pipeline. And in that process, the people who were the top performers at Meltwater, like if you look at the top 10 or 20 reps while I was there, it's like SVP of sales at Slack, VP of sales at Salesforce, VP of sales at Box, SVP of sales at Okta. Like it's literally all of these people have gone on to have insanely successful careers. And I bet many of them many of them are CEOs of their own companies. Like it's like an insane sales mafia network. And it all stems from the fact, I deeply believe that if the first thing you learn is that nobody is ever going to hand you a deal and you got to earn your own deal end to end, it just teaches you the reality of how you have to operate in a sales motion. And so I find it to be a core differentiator between good and great salespeople is just their ability to generate their own pipe, which obviously starts by picking up the phone.
I agree. And there probably is some, probably is some bias too. Yeah.
I could literally talk to you for another like 2 hours. This is such a good conversation. I would, but I want to be respectful of your time, Jonathan. And before I have you go, I really do want you to play our lightning round that we do at the end of all of
Okay.
these. So
Let's do it.
we'll do that if you'll commit to stopping by and doing an episode 2 with me at some point later this year. Because I've got a lot more that I want to ask you about that I think is really good. But let's get to the lightning round. So first question I have is, we talk a lot here at Bravado about how sales is a superpower and how, sales is something that isn't just a job, but it's a skill set, and it's a skill set that you can wield in both your professional and your personal life. What's an example of where you used your sales superpower in your personal life that you think is a cool story to share?
I tend to push back a lot, like I mentioned earlier. That's just my personality. I find that to be really helpful in things outside of work, like we did a remodel in our house and working with GCs and like, thinking about things like as it relates to like my daughter and like stuff like that, which I think is really helpful. I don't know if this is a sales superpower, so maybe I'm going to kind of cheat here, and not follow the rules and change the question a little bit.
Sounds like a salesperson.
Probably. I'm just such a naturally curious person, and like in every aspect of my job, of my life, of everything, I'm always asking why. And I find that like when my wife and I are in situations outside of our comfort zone, maybe we're somewhere at our daughter's school or somewhere like that like we're outside of our comfort zone just in general. I really enjoy connecting with people and just asking people about them. What I've also find is when you spend the majority of your time asking people questions, they tend to, I think, generally enjoy you more and that interaction more. And I think my ability to be curious and ask questions has significantly helped in social aspects outside of work, because I genuinely am curious. And when I hear someone that does something interesting or people are interesting, I just want to talk to them all the time. So I think that's been fun to experience.
It taps into the hubris of people that they want to talk about themselves, and
Yeah.
having a captive audience of someone who finds that interesting leads them to overshare or, in turn give you a benefit or whatnot.
Yeah.
I have found that to be the same. My daughter, I think similar age to yours, goes to preschool, and after a month or so of drop-offs and pickups at the school, my wife and I kind of take turns where like I'll do a month of pickups and drop-offs, and then she'll do the
Oh,
next
cool.
month. So that way both of us get time to like occasionally exercise or something. I was off for a month and then I was back on the next month, and I showed up, and the first day I walked in, they're like, you were the friendliest parent. No one else says hi to us, et cetera, et cetera. Like they were just like so excited, like the ladies at the front to see me. And the benefit of which has been transferred over to my daughter, who has like have built this really sweet relationship with her. So none of the kids are allowed to go back into the office, but my daughter, as soon as she gets out of school, runs to the back office, into the principal's office, jumps into her desk, steals her candy. Like literally, she's like a little terror and they've kind of like broken the rules just for her. And every time my wife goes, she's like, why does everyone say hi all the time to me? And why is Mira friends with them? And it's just like this really interesting, like, connection through sales. But
That's
in any
awesome,
case,
man. That's super cute.
okay. Next question I have for you is, what is the best advice that someone gave you early in your career that if they were to give it to you today, or you were to give it to someone, might get you canceled, but, is like the sage advice, the truisms that are lost in today's post-woke society?
I don't know if this follows that exactly, but like something that's really stuck with me is like early on in my career, I remember talking to a prospect, and I talked more than they did. Like we connected, I talked more than they did. And I remember a boss telling me, and this kind of has always stuck with me, dude, no one gives a shit about you. You're in sales. Your only job is to make them feel special and to buy. Like, don't talk about yourself. No one cares. And like, I think like it's true in some aspects. It's not true in others. Like it is important. Like, like we build meaningful relationships with people, and that typically only happens when two people are sharing. But I do find it to be true that if you find yourself talking more about yourself to a prospect than them talking to you about themselves or them opening up, uh, you're probably searching for something that you shouldn't be searching for in a sales call.
I had a third question, but that was so good that I don't think we could beat it. So I'm gonna say that was awesome. Don't search for yourself. It's not eat, pray, love on the sales call, is Jonathan's advice.
Totally.
My friend, thank you so much for doing this. Thanks for being so candid and sharing so many of the insights of what you've learned, both across your long sales career and as well as building out Nooks. Congratulations on all of the success. And let's check back in with you 6 months from now or whatever to see how things are going, and do episode 2, because you have so many great insights to share. And I'm really grateful for you sharing it with the sales community.
Awesome. I appreciate it, man. I appreciate you. It's been a blast.